everybody, this is Hannah. I'm one of the special education teachers at Alameda, and I'm also a horticultural therapist. Today, as part of our Hope Garden program through Alameda, we're going to be doing fairy gardens, and as part of that we're going to be encompassing some wellness and therapeutic practices, because as we all know, in this quarantine things have been crazy and I'm sure causing lots of anxiety for many people, and so having some therapy, having some wellness activity can be really healing through this process. So horticultural therapy is basically therapy used for healing lots of different types of things. Many different populations use this, from spinal cord injuries to mental health, to people with developmental disabilities, to people who just struggle with anxiety, using gardening and horticulture activities to create healing and therapy. So the activity that we're going to be doing today is creating fairy gardens, and that's a commonly used practice in horticultural therapy because it also incorporates play therapy, which is a way for adults and for kids to kind of tap into their inner child, use play to really release some anxiety, and create just a general well-being. And it's also been scientifically proven that putting our hands in dirt releases endorphins in our body, which is that happy hormone. And so it will make you feel better if you're feeling anxious or depressed, to just get your hands in the dirt and start playing. So making a fairy garden is actually really easy and inexpensive if you do it the right way, and if you are mindful of the things that you're using. So we have a couple examples of some fairy gardens, and I don't actually have fairies that I put in these gardens. So instead of using a fairy for this garden, I used some little dinosaurs that I had from when I was a kid. So really, any types of toys that you have laying around the house, you don't even need toys in there if you don't want to, are a good way to make these fairy gardens inexpensively. We also just have some sticks that I found in the yard and rocks that I found in the yard. And these plants were all clearance plants that I found from Lowe's or Home Depot when you make the fairy garden, so it's really easy to make sure you're doing this inexpensively. And a lot of these things can be done with just things that you have laying around the house. Another example of a fairy garden that we have is this one with some things that we did buy from the dollar store. So they have a little van, a little grill, fairy, things like that. And again, here is some plants we got from the store. A little pond you can create walkways, and then we just have some moss that we got from the store as well. So those are just a couple of the examples of fairy gardens you can do. These were both done in round pots that were relatively shallow, but you can really do any size pot as long as you are making sure it's deep enough to fit the plants that you're using. So when picking out plants, you want to make sure that you know where you're planning to put your fairy garden, so you know what kind of plants to get. So for the fairy garden that we are going to be making today, I'm going to be making sure to put it in the sun. So I have a place picked out that I want to. So the plants that I have picked out, I've made sure that on the tag it says full sun. And so every plant that I have picked out for this activity will get full sun, and they all need relatively the same amount of water. So for these particular fairy gardens, I'm not adding any succulents to them because those need less water than these plants, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to water those and try to avoid some of those. It is possible, but for the sake of ease, I have all of these plants that are just full sun and all of them that require the same amount of water. So like I said, making fairy gardens can be done very inexpensively. So to make the houses, what I like to do is to use old plastic bottles. This one is a fabric softener box that I paint with some sort of either acrylic paint or exterior paint, which you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's in the sample size for $2, and then they last you a really long time. And then I use hot glue and I use super glue to add rocks or brick or sticks to make it look more natural. So I left this one undone to show the process of how this looks. But this is gonna be one of the bigger fairy houses that we'll use in a big fairy garden that we do. So for example, this is the pot that we're gonna be turning into a fairy house for this garden that we're doing today. It'll fit really well right here, and we'll just use sticks and bark and things that we can find in the backyard or around the house or at a park, and just hot glue and super glue these guys on. Some other supplies that are really, really helpful and inexpensive are cork and bottle caps. So if you just hot glue a cork to a bottle cap and then you paint the top red with some white dots or whatever color you want to do it, you can make little toadstools. And so that's a really inexpensive way to have some decorations for your fairy garden. So here I just saved lots of bottle caps and some corks. Sometimes I cut them in half so that they would be a size for a chair, and then I leave the long ones the size of a table. And so that's a really cute way to add some color to your fairy garden. Super glue is a really, really helpful thing to have for those things that are having a hard time sticking. It does seem to do well on the plastic, and so you just have to make sure to hold it on long enough so it sticks well, but this works well because it weathers pretty good. And then rocks, I found these at Michael's for half price, but you can just find rocks around the house. If you have them in your backyard or even up at a park, just taking a few rocks to make borders or you know, part of the river, whatever you want to do for the rock. So this is another really good supply to have. And then I have just a variety of other different colored rocks. So I have blue marbles that I use to make ponds and rivers. I have white rocks that I use to make paths and like patios and things like that. So having a variety of different colors will really add dimension to your fairy garden. When you're out on walks with your kids or you're just walking around, it's a good idea to just pick up some sticks and some bark so you have it on hand. So I use this stuff a lot when I'm making the fairy houses to glue for things like the roof, for example. I'm using sticks and I just cut them in half. And so it's nice to have those in a bin already on hand, ready to go. They can also be used for things like fences, borders, and things like that. Popsicle sticks are also a huge help in this. I have just torn all of these popsicle sticks in half, and then I just stick them into the soil to create a fence and to create a path, which you'll see as we go in further with this, how that's going to turn out. Some more helpful supplies to have are moss. So when you're making your fairy garden, to make it look a lot more luscious and full, it's helpful to add moss around the areas that you didn't have. Okay, so we turned that green pot that we had that was just plastic into this fairy garden, or this fairy house. And the way I did that was I just used a box cutter to cut a little door, to cut a little bit of a window, and then I used bark for the walls. I used little pebbles for the outline of the window and the door. Moss that I got from the dollar store to fill in between the bark, and then I just used sticks from around my yard to make the roof. So that will fit perfectly right here. I've already gone ahead and filled up our pot and made the border because it takes a little bit more time to do that, and so I wanted to save some time for the video. When I'm making fairy gardens, the first thing I typically like to do is place the house where I want it, and then place a path where I want that to be, because then it gives me the space that I have to work around. And so that's typically how I like to go about that. So next, what I'm going to do is just fill in this pathway in between these popsicle sticks with white rock, so it looks like we have a bit of a walkway up to the garden. Not only does it look cute with the fence like that, but it also protects water from getting dirt running into the path when you water the plants that we're gonna be putting in here. And so it's kind of a good idea to have that border so you don't just have lots of dirt on top of the path. So we'll just fill this in. Okay. So another important part about doing fairy gardens is having different layers, so it makes it look like there's more dimension. And one of the ways that we can do that is by creating different textures throughout the pot. So here's one example of a texture that we're gonna be using, and we're actually gonna try to bring that texture in over here as well. So we're gonna create a little bit of a patio over here. And we're just gonna fill this in with white rock. All right, so now we're gonna plant some of the flowers that we bought from the store in our fairy garden, so we know where we're working around with the other decorations. So one of the things I like to do is plant the taller things towards the back of the fairy garden, and your low hanging things or plants that drape over, I like those to be more focused towards the front. And I also like to just lay it out first so I know exactly where I want everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and add these guys right here because they're the tallest that I have, and they kind of border the house like that. And then I'm gonna take these lower hanging ground covers. These are called creeping speedwell. These will actually eventually turn out to be this long and drape over the front. So this is something that I want to have right in the front there, so it can hang over the edge. Now these guys are called cup flower. These are also going to be draping. These do have flowers that will eventually bloom, so this is a nice way to add some color as well. So we're going to keep those also right along the border there. And I like to keep things pretty symmetrical. Okay, so once you have things laid out where you would like them to go, see, I want this to go here. You can go ahead and just dig your holes and plant those. Okay, so once you have your plants in, don't forget to water those in, but do it really gently so you try not to bleed any dirt into the other fairy garden pieces that you've put in there. And then now's the fun part. You can kind of just get creative and add things that you have made or that you have found. So in this area, I'm gonna add a little table and chairs made out of those toadstools that we did with the bottle caps and the corks. Another fun thing that you can do is make little ponds. So here's an example. I don't have any more blue to make it here, but you can just create a border and then put little blue rocks or blue sand, anything that you can find to make it look like there's a little pond. So that's one fun option that you can also do. And I would say just get creative. There's lots of different things that you can do with these fairy gardens to make them fun and different. And then in these little side areas here, we're gonna go ahead and add some more things here, but on all of these side pieces that we can't quite get the plants in, we can't quite tuck them into the corner. We're gonna just take some moss that we got from the dollar store, and this really makes it look even more luscious and kind of like magical and whimsical, because there's green moss growing everywhere. So we'll just tuck that in to the little nooks and crannies that we missed.